Kathy. Everybody, I just wanted to say thanks for joining us today. It looks like an awesome turnout. And I know this group is always one of the most enthusiastic that I get to work with, so I'm excited to be here today. I am the manager of forest conservation at American Forests. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization based in Washington, D.C., whose mission is to advance and inspire the conservation of forests. I'm here today to describe my role as a modeler for the National Crediting Framework for Urban Trees, and my goals today are to describe the modeling effort, some of the considerations that we had to take into account that capture that variability from location to tree species, and describe the data products that came from this effort. American Forests is a leader in urban forestry, an innovator ranging from a strong and sustained policy effort for federal funding for urban programs, as well as creation of urban tree canopy assessments and other products similar to that. And the map here is showing where our community relief team is currently or has recently provided leadership, financial, and expert support in some of the major U.S. cities. This work is timely and important. We continue to gain urban forests as communities grow, as development continues, and as some of our rural landscapes are transitioning into urban areas. But some of the repeat urban tree canopy assessments are showing that we're also losing tree canopy as development continues, as trees are lost due to pests and disease, and as choices of private landowners change what that tree canopy looks like, either through removal or planting. And I just wanted to mention that this work highlights only one of many benefits of trees. So I'm going to be talking about the stormwater benefits today, but I also wanted to point you to another resource that we recently launched with the U.S. Forest Service called the Vibrant Cities Lab, which is a toolkit for urban forestry that captures a lot of the research and messages that are useful for communicating the benefits of urban forestry. And one thing that I think most of you know is really important in this sector is building and fostering relationships with non-urban tree planting experts. So transportation authorities, municipalities, these are all really important players and partners in this space. Just to give you a little bit more background to build on what Karen described, this work first started about 2 years ago with the Chesapeake Bay program, trying to find a way to recognize the services that existing urban trees provide, as well as newly planted trees provide. And during the development of this model, we were working with the Chesapeake Bay program model, using some of the existing tools that go into that, and decided that a water balance model was the most appropriate approach. In the Bay model, you typically use land use conversions, where you're transitioning urban, open space to development or vice versa, but there wasn't really a way to capture tree canopy and those services in that model. So what a water balance model does, it accounts for all the additions and losses of water from a drainage area. And what this allows us to do is compare multiple land uses at the same time, using similar assumptions that inform water yield, nutrient and sediment transport to streams, rivers, and other water bodies. You're probably most familiar with this work at the watershed scale. So I have a picture here of one of our restoration projects in Monongahela National Forest. It's a pretty big scale mineland reclamation project, planting red spruce. And at that scale, we're typically able to look in the rivers, do measurements of the water quality, and detect those changes over time. But as Karen described, in these cities, those measurements are really difficult. Maybe you're doing some small tree plantings. Those tree plantings might be dispersed, And then there are other changes in that watershed that might override or swamp the signature that you're seeing, those benefits that you're seeing from tree planting. And so a water balance approach is really the best approach here for approximating what those benefits are. And I do believe there's a pretty innovative project in Minnesota, if I'm remembering correctly, that's trying to attempt some more measured approaches for detecting these benefits. Some of the challenges for the national credit that we had to take into account were that location matters. Across the country, we've got very different weather, precip patterns, and so getting a representative suite of cities to characterize those differences was really important. We started with the stratum climate zones. So there's 14 original zones mapped across the US. We ended up reducing that to 11 just to kind of aggregate a couple smaller areas, and then chose 3 representative cities from each climate zone to cover the greatest spatial extent. And we relied on data from the National Climatic Data Center and the National Solar Radiation Database to compute the metrics for precipitation, evaporation, and transpiration. And this map here shows each of the cities that we took data from those sources from and then aggregated them into the broader zones that you see mapped out there. The other really important criteria was tree selection. So we know in urban areas, landscape design is really important, whether you're trying to choose trees for aesthetic features, wildlife habitat, recreation, beautification. You're making decisions that could ultimately impact the overall benefit that you're obtaining from those trees. So for each of the cities that we calculated the water balance model for, we selected 5 reference native trees of different size and type to get a sense of what those range of conditions were. So we chose a large, a medium, and a small broadleaf deciduous tree, and then a small and large conifer tree. And those selections were informed by the McPherson tree guides, which are very popular, and then other reference books. We obtained the key physical attributes of trees near maturity using iTree Forecast, and those attributes were leaf area index, tree height, and tree canopy area. So those were the 3 primary factors that we were looking at and assessing in the modeling work. The other key factor is soils. This is sometimes a little bit of a difficult issue to work with in urban areas, which can have many disturbed soils. But vegetation is really only one part of the water cycle. And so we wanted to be able to capture what those differences in effect were when you planted trees over multiple soil types. And so for each city, we used the main 4 hydrologic soil groups. These are well established in the literature, except we did make a small adjustment in some of the math to account for the smaller spatial scale. And we also did these calculations for impervious surfaces too. So this is a table from the USGS's Urban Hydrology for Small Watersheds, showing the range in values that are applied to the equations there for estimating runoff from different surfaces. So what I want to do now is just walk you through some of the calculations. This is the first step in the conceptual model that we developed. It's kind of breaking apart all the features that Karen showed in her graphic into stepwise equations. And this conceptual model, my coworkers affectionately refer to that tree as the tree comb. And this is what happens when you have some analytical skills but limited design skills. So I apologize for the tree comb here. But the water balance calculations that we performed, they were daily stepwise water balance equations where we first looked at the incoming precipitation, used the hydrologic curve method to estimate runoff, and then determine what the effect of a tree for that first step was. So interception and infiltration are both captured there. The second step was we used the remaining amount of water that didn't run off, so your precip minus your runoff, to determine how much water was staying on site. We then took a fixed volume of soil and determined how much water that soil could hold over that day. And then used the solar radiation database, the Penman-Monteith equation, and calculated evapotranspiration to track the change in soil water over time. And this was one of the first things I looked at with the data output to make sure I didn't kill any of the digital trees that we were modeling here. So that's one of the things that will keep modelers up at night from day to day. So I think I can assure you that no digital trees were killed during this modeling effort. And then what we did was we repeated these daily calculations with different land uses so that we were comparing apples to apples. So this is just showing the same summary, but with turfgrass or another urban open space, showing how the model interacts with that land use. So here, I just want to take some time walking you through the data products. So it's a series of tables that were generated comparing the effect of a tree to either the effect of open space or an impervious surface. And the output looks like that, at least in this situation, because we wanted to know from a land use change perspective, what's the percent reduction that you would gain by converting one land use to another. So this is a little bit different than other tools you might be used to, such as iTree, where you get an estimate of the benefit of the tree, but not in comparison to an underlying land use. So here I'm just showing the climate zone. This will be northeast, the 5 tree types that we modeled for each location, and then the different soil conditions and land cover classes that we did the water balance calculations for. So here I'm going to be showing total water reductions. There's other tables and output that the Center for Watershed Protection has on their website where it breaks it down into just runoff, just the groundwater or the leaching reduction, and then adjustment tables for nitrogen, phosphorus, and sediment. And I just want to drive home that all of these values are for trees near maturity. So the first thing we're looking at here is just for a single soil type. Try to walk you through how I think about some of these tables. So here we're really comparing the effect of individual trees for the single soil type. In general, we did see that both large and medium trees had pretty similar percent reductions. In some cases, the medium trees were actually larger, and I'm going to explain that caveat in a second. But then your small and large conifer trees also varied, with the conifer trees often having a much higher percent reduction. And the reason that is, one of the caveats is that this is a unitless metric. So when we're looking at percent reduction, it's only comparing the change in water depth. And what's driving that difference here is the leaf area index in these different conifer species. So these were designed to form land use changes, and what you'll want to do when applying these in use is actually consider the area treated by the canopy of each different size tree. And so in some ways this masks the effect of the different size trees relative to each other. And I'll do another example at the very end to illustrate that. The other really important factor that we were looking at is how does the effect of a tree vary when your soil type changes? And one of the key findings was that soils with good quality seem to perform even better when you're planting trees. They're able to infiltrate more water based on the interception and slowing down of that water from the surface. And then they're also transpiring more water, so there's a dual benefit there. It was a little surprising going through this effort just to see how different impervious surfaces were compared to broadleaf trees, because we think of that as being one of the major benefits of urban trees. But what's included in these total benefits are the reduction in leaching too, which isn't included in that calculation. And so what you might want to keep in mind as a practitioner is that urban soils, policies and procedures that protect soil quality are really important, or even enhancing soils when you're thinking about planting trees. The other place I just wanted to highlight was the impervious surface reductions. Again, this is being mostly driven by changes in leaf area index. And these values were smaller than I think intuitively you might think. But I just want to drive home the point that these low percentages do have a meaningful impact. When you think about the speed at which water runs off surfaces in urban areas, there are benefits to slowing that down that reduce erosion and nutrient and sediment transport in the stream itself. And just again, for impervious surfaces, trees can only influence the water reaching the ground. And so if you looked at a table comparing runoff reduction to total reduction, they're actually going to be the same for impervious surfaces. And I know tables can be really boring, so I didn't want everybody to lose sight that the fun part is designing and thinking about what this means on the landscape, in your community. And I just think this is a really fun image to illustrate that, using our imagination to make these communities a better place. And just to give one more example, I wanted to highlight some of how you might interpret this in your community. So I did a little example for Raleigh, North Carolina, which is actually my new home as of Saturday. And so I was curious just to see, what are the benefits that are going to be occurring in the new community that I'm going to be a part of. So I just did a quick scenario where I assumed that for this location, which falls in the southern climate zone, I was going to plant 100 London plane trees, which fall into the large broadleaf category, and 400 flowering dogwood, so small broadleaf. So the percent reductions for impervious surfaces are highlighted in yellow. Hopefully you can see that okay. But I'm assuming that we're going to do a street tree planting. So here I'm showing the canopy area near maturity for each of these two tree types based on the output that we use from iTree Forecast. And for this number of trees, your overall water reduction is 4% over almost an acre. And 4% might not sound like a lot, but for each London plane tree, when you consider the size, it's close to 2,500 gallons per tree. And for the dogwood, it's about 200 gallons. So for the project overall, we're talking about an estimate of around 330,000 gallons per year near maturity for these trees. So just reinforcing the fact that these low percentages can still have meaningful and important stormwater benefits. And just wanted to mention again that the Center for Watershed Protection does have these resources and some other resources, including a pretty nifty Excel calculator spreadsheet that's available for folks to use. So that concludes my portion of the talk. Kathy, I'll pass it back over to you, or I think it's going directly to Karen. So thank you.